Hey everybody, in this episode, we're going to talk in depth about more BRI related projects. So that's the Chinese One Belt One Road Initiative projects. I'm going to cover a little bit of information about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, some people who are involved in that, some countries involved in it. And we're going to take a look and see how Europe is slowly being tied closer and closer to Chinese companies and possibly the Chinese government. So if you want to learn more about this, which I know you do, sit down, take a listen. Okay, guys, so let's talk about China. Let's talk about the Belt and Road infrastructure. Let's get into it. So I am at a website called beltandroad.news. It's a very interesting website dedicated to Asian-related affairs, more specifically affairs tied to BRI initiative projects and Chinese type of news. Obviously, this is going to have a Chinese perspective on it, but I do think it's very interesting for pulling out some information that we can use to create our own perspectives, our own opinions, and hopefully create some food for thought. So there's an article here titled "The AIIB Okays $250 million loan for Beijing's natural gas project." This is from June 3rd, today, 2019. It says the AIIB is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And it's kind of like a IMF type of situation where countries contribute money to a fund, and then that fund is used, is loaned out. That money is loaned out to countries to build infrastructure and things like that. So here, what do we have here? Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank announced on Monday a $250 million loan for a natural gas project in Beijing to support the ongoing process of coal to gas conversion and to improve air quality in the Chinese capital city and its neighboring region. So we have here the Chinese are basically taking out a loan from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank for $250 million. So I assume under these conditions, they'll get favorable interest rates and things like that. It should also be noted that China is a 30%, they have so far funded 30% of the operations of the AIIB, and that is according to the website AIIB.org. You can pull up, if you go to their website and you get to their page about AIIB governance and members, you see who the members are and how much they've contributed. And then it also goes over their voting power, which I haven't looked at here. Let's take a look at that. So we've got China. So China they have invested 30% of the total funding so far, and that has come out to $29 billion. And they have a 26%, they have 300,000 votes, and that is 26% voting power. So they have a significant share of the voting power, probably more than anybody else. And they are using this bank to take out a loan to convert their coal plants, I guess, to natural gas plants. Let's continue. Scheduled for completion in 2021, the project will help reduce China's coal use by about 650,000 metric tons annually through connecting 216,000 households in about 510 rural villages to natural gas distribution network, the Beijing-based multilateral financial institution said in a statement. So yes, it should also be noted that this bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, headquarters is located in Beijing. So it is primarily a Chinese project, similar to how the UN was initially a US project. So that is the situation here, and they're basically, like I've said, they're using the funds to build out a natural gas pipeline network because currently in China, they use a lot of coal for a lot of things. When I was there in 2012 through 2013, it was very common for people to use coal for things like cooking and heating housing. actually. Not like apartment living, but I've heard out in houses, rural areas, people use coal for that. And people used coal for, barbecuing and stuff like that. So a lot of coal being used in China. It says the project's first corporate loan and first investment in China. It will be carried out by the Beijing Gas Group Company and will involve construction of natural gas distribution networks and low-pressure gas pipelines and household connections. China's commitment to reducing its reliance on coal will change lives and improve the environment, and that is why we are investing in a project aligned with their ambitious plans, said the AIIB president, Jin Li-chun. With our unwavering commitment to helping members meet their environmental and development goals, especially their commitments under the Paris Agreement, it is only fitting that our first investment in China will introduce sustainable infrastructure that will reduce greenhouse emissions and help vitalize one of the most important economic hubs in Asia. So this definitely makes sense. China, especially the northeast part of China, where they have lots of factories, has been dealing with ridiculous amounts of smog for a long time now. So they're trying to solve this problem, and they are using the AIIB as a way to do it. I think this is important because I believe that the world is going through a big restructuring in terms of the centers of power. I think to a lot of people this is obvious. And I'm not saying that China is going to be this world dominant power that's going to be the hegemon. It's going to take over the U.S. totally. I think it's obvious, though, that we are moving towards a more multilateral world with more global leaders, most notably just Russia and China. I mean, the U.S. and China. Russia's economy is a fraction of what the United States and China is. They're definitely a military threat, but when it comes to economics and what they can do economically, they're not as much of a global nuisance. But China is will be an adversary of the United States probably for a long time to come, and they're setting up institutions like the AIIB in order to shift the center of power from the West to the East. Makes perfect sense. If I was them, I would do the same thing. And that's not a statement of whether it's right or wrong. So, as we can see how China is, how they're making these moves, I also want to note, I've talked previously about how the Belt and Road is a good idea from a Chinese standpoint, and how they are making a lot of progress in terms of getting other countries on board, and how they're making progress into Europe. It should also be noted that I guess what's interesting about the Chinese strategy is they're very prolific, very, very prolific. So let's go ahead and move on to another section here. I want to talk about how basically the United States has been critical of, let's focus on the BRI and Huawei. So before we do that, I'll take a quick break here and do some ad reads. So we'll be right back. Hey everybody, do you want to record your own podcast like me? Well, Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. That's right, mofos. It's easy. Check it out. So we have a situation where the U.S. and China are currently locked in an interesting battle over Huawei and 5G. Basically, there's what people call a race for the 5G, for the implementation of 5G, because the companies that control, the idea is that the companies that control and build out the initial 5G infrastructure will have an advantage over other companies, and so it's important for countries that have a strategic interest in this technology to pay close attention to who's building their networks. Now, in the United States, obviously, we are basically going toe-to-toe with China and Huawei. And we're trying to basically slow down Huawei's advancement into 5G across the United States, which I think we are very successful in the United States, but around the world, not so much. I know Europe is heavily, looks like they're going to be using Huawei networks for 5G. So let's go ahead, and before we go into that, I want to talk about how Europe is also tied in financially to China, and in a interesting way, that is going to be in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So who is tied into this? And we're going to look through some totals here. Since 2015, we've got Austria, Belarus, Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Hungary, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, Malta, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK are all non-regional members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I don't necessarily think it is. I honestly don't know what to think about this whole situation. But some of these countries have put in a significant amount of money. We've got Canada has almost put in $1 billion, $995 million, since they joined last year. Finland has contributed $310 million since 2016. France has contributed over $3 billion since 2016. Germany has contributed over $4 billion since 2015. So Italy has contributed over $2.5 billion since 2016, and the Netherlands over $1 billion, and the UK, Spain over $1 billion, the UK over $3 billion. They've contributed to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So the Chinese strategy is very effective. They are getting lots of European allies on board. Like I said, not saying it's a good or bad thing. That's just what's going on. Now, I want to tie this into a broader situation. So we've got you have a situation here where the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is being funded 30% by China, but also has substantial holdings or investment from European countries and other Asian countries and Asian allies of the United States, are basically aiding in the construction of Chinese infrastructure projects. Okay, so that's interesting. I'm just going to leave that there. Now, what else is interesting? We have, there is an article here titled Belt and Road Initiative Helps China Counter U.S. Bullying. The world has been witnessing the difficulty in the U.S. to tame a roaring and increasingly destructive force in the White House. Blah, blah, blah. It says, after launching tariffs on steel and aluminum from nearly all countries and firing up a trade war with China, the U.S. put Huawei Technologies on a blacklist, cutting off all American supplies in its desperate attempt to destroy the global 5G corporate leader. Okay, so we're back on the Huawei situation. And then they say that earlier the Trump administration threatened to... here we go. For China and the Chinese people, we have to stand firm and united and give our strongest support to help Huawei blunt the savage attack of the U.S. government because it makes the world's best 5G cloud and AI technologies. So I've said this before. I've talked to people in China. They say that there's a lot of public support for Huawei. This article is just kind of backing that up. It talks about how the Malaysian Prime Minister fully backs. There's basically a lot of countries are backing Huawei or going to use Huawei technology. Malaysia is one of them. And then it says, in addition to Malaysia, dozens of countries affirmed that they will import Huawei's 5G equipment and devices, including Russia, France, Germany, Italy, South Korea, and many more in Middle East, Asia, Europe, and Africa. Chinese people appreciate these countries' audacity to stave off the threats of the U.S. government. So what I think is interesting here is the fact that the European countries are tied in. So we are seeing a gradual alignment of European countries and U.S. allies with China. And I don't know how far this will go. Economically, it is significant in my opinion. But we've got, of course, Russia's going to be involved, but France, Germany, Italy, and South Korea. So I said, after looking at this article in the Belt and Road News, I remember seeing something last week about this. So I wanted to double check with a Western source. So here we go. This is from May 31st. In Reuters, Pompeo tells Germany, use Huawei and lose access to our data. So the United States raised pressure on Western allies in a war of attrition over next-generation networks on Friday, saying countries that allow China's Huawei to build their telecoms infrastructure could be cut off from crucial intelligence data. So that's pretty straightforward, saying that if you allow China to build out your network, we are not going to be sharing sensitive information across that network with you. And let's see here. It's more than just so Secretary of State Pompeo issued the warning after meeting Foreign Minister Heiko Maas of Germany, which has so far stood with Britain and France in declining calls to ban state-owned manufacturer from the 5G networks now being built. So there we go. This is backed up from Belt and Road by Reuters. Germany, Britain, and France are declining so far to ban the Huawei from building out their 5G infrastructure. So, interesting situation there. Let's continue with the development of where I want to go with this. So we see that France, Germany, some of these countries are, a week ago, I read an article and used it in the podcast to talk about how Italy is going to be using the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative funding in order to build out some of their infrastructure. So Europe is being heavily tied into Chinese infrastructure plans. And then there was a very interesting article I read about the ports. So here we say China-operated ports raise fears for U.S. and NATO. So basically, and I didn't realize this, but let's read a little bit here. It says, in recent months, U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened NATO allies in Europe with punitive measures if they buy 5G wireless tech from Chinese telecom giant Huawei. And then it continues on to say that while Washington has so far, according to this reasoning, Chinese port companies could potentially monitor U.S. warships docking at European facilities. So basically there's a situation where I didn't realize this, but apparently there are major Chinese companies, big Chinese companies that are operating ports throughout the world. So it says it talks about at the moment, U.S. vessels continue to stop at ports of allied countries in which the Chinese have a presence. In mid-April, Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Misher docked at the Greek port of Piraeus, which is majority owned by China's COSCO shipping ports. The port authority there said it is being managed by the Chinese and said that apart from the USS Misher, 2 more Navy ships from the European NATO countries made a call at its terminal in April. As well, the aircraft carrier USS John C. Stennis recently conducted a port visit to Marseille. China Merchants Port Holdings Company holds 25% stake in the French port's Eurofos terminal. So that is a terminal we've got a Greek terminal, and we've got a Greek shipping port. We've got a French shipping port, and there's another one in Israel. So, and there's one there's also one here. It says the Rotterdam Port Authority declined to comment on whether it shared the U.S. government concerns about China's activities in port facilities of allied countries. So China has significant ownership in ports throughout the Western world. I did not know this. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So why would they do this? I don't know for sure, but some of my speculation is that, the Western world has been in a kind of a debt situation, a debt problem for a while, where we have large deficits, large debts, and it's getting very difficult to fund infrastructure projects. And infrastructure needs to be maintained, whether it be ports, roads, bridges, whatever. So people are basically letting Chinese companies and Chinese sponsored activities fund their reconstruction and operation. And so the fear is this. The fear is that the Chinese companies will use their access to the ports to basically monitor and obtain intelligence about NATO ships, U.S. ships, and I don't know how legitimate of a concern that is. It seems like a legitimate concern. I don't know, but I'm just presenting some facts here. It also talks about Italy. The Italian Infrastructure and Transportation Ministry said that commercial ports in Italy did not have particular security protocols to deal with possible Chinese intelligence operations. COSCO and Qingdao Port International Development have together a 49.9% participation in Vado Ligure Terminal, which is part of the Genoa port and will start operations this December. So it also says that Chinese companies are also active in U.S. ports. For instance, SIPG cooperates with Georgia Ports Authority, Seattle Port, and Port of Miami. Very interesting. So I'd be interested to look more into that. But it seems very interesting here that the Chinese have a very large presence. So let's kind of summarize some things I've gone through so far. Is that basically there's a big bank called the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. They are funded by many Asian countries, Russia, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, all types of countries in between. And they have a fair amount of European partners, including France, Italy, Germany, who are contributing sometimes over a few $billion over the course of these last several years to this bank. China, it has just used their first loan to build infrastructure for themselves using this bank. This is important, in my opinion, because it just shows how the Western, how the centers of power are starting to shift. This is just an example. I'm not sounding an alarm, just an example of the changing conditions of the world. And also, I've talked a lot about the Belt and Road Initiative and how I think it's a very good strategic strategy from the Chinese, and how they are using it to for many different ways, many different reasons. But what we see here is that Europeans are tied into these Chinese projects very, very heavily. So not only are they investing in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is run by Beijing or run in Beijing, but they also are using the BRI funding to build infrastructure in their countries. Like I think I know Italy's doing that. I think some other European countries are as well. We also see that a lot of Chinese companies have heavy stakes in European ports. So a lot of stuff going on here. And basically, the Chinese are doing a very good job of diversifying their assets around the world to make sure that they have access to ports, they have access to highways, to railroads. And I think I'm going to go ahead and end that there. Hopefully you learned a little something, and I'll get back to you later.